Hi, welcome back to Ask BirdGuy. I'm Matthew Daughter, Executive Director of Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, and I'm coming to you from my secret mountain laboratory located somewhere in Mountain View, California. Anyway, Cricket and I just returned from a short vacation in the Sierra a few days ago, and pretty much every summer we try to get up to the hills, to the mountains, because there's so many birds up there that we just don't find down here, and they're really characteristic of the montane habitat. Some of the great birds we saw when we were up there were McGillivray's warbler with a beautiful, rich song, Cassin's finch, Clark's nutcracker, evening grosbeak, pine grosbeak. The two grosbeaks, of course, are not closely related, which is interesting, where none of our grosbeaks are very closely related. Um, Except for rose-breasted and black-headed. Those are closely related. We saw Williamson's sapsucker, black-backed woodpecker, and the pièce de résistance, the flammulated owl, which was a lifer for us. We had to wake up 2 days in a row at 3 in the morning and drive to a secluded country road to search and listen for it. We finally not only heard it, but we saw it very clearly. So that was truly a wonderful experience, and I encourage you to go up to the hills at some point, to the mountains during the summertime. The Sierra is filled with birds, and surprisingly, not that many people. There were more people than there had been last year, but everybody was pretty courteous, wearing masks and letting each other pass with plenty of space on the trails. So I wanted to show you a few books that we used to plan our trip when it came to looking for birds. There's a fairly recent book, Birds of the Sierra Nevada, which is illustrated by Keith Hansen. It's quite wonderful. It has extended chapters on target species in the Sierra, and it's quite wonderful. Jack Law's book, The Sierra Nevada, is everything from insects, plants, birds, reptiles, amphibians. It's really quite wonderful. And in fact, the bird section is kind of sorted out by color, which is unique and refreshing. So I really enjoyed that. And a book that we didn't use this time because we weren't in Yosemite is Birds of Yosemite, again illustrated by Keith Hansen. This is not a very new book. It's quite old at this point, but it's an annotated checklist. So it's got bar charts like that to tell you when birds can be seen in the Yosemite area. Also covers the east slope, you might notice here. So it was a wonderful trip, and I encourage you to make the voyage up there some summer. The timing is important. You want to get there before the breeding is over, obviously. So late spring would be perfect, June, and early July, like we went. So anyway, today we're going to talk a little bit about terns, because terns are another thing to look for during summer, especially in the Bay Area. We've got these wonderful salt ponds, these levee trails that go for miles and miles and miles around the Alviso area and Charleston Slough, etc. Wonderful places to look for terns. And we'll talk about the terns that we should target this time of year, but I'll tell you there are some more books, of course, that are helpful. Both of the advanced birding guides are very helpful when it comes to distinguishing common tern from the much more common Forster's tern. So I would find one of these at the library or the bookstore. I give it a read. They both have great information on terns. Your field guide, of course, is crucial to noticing the field marks of the terns, especially this time of year when they begin to molt into their basic plumage. So you'll find that even though there are lots of young birds around, many of the adults have started their pre-basic molt. So look for that. And another book which is rather hard to find, Terns of Europe and North America. This is a Helm ID guide, and it's got some wonderful plates with several images, both stationary and flying. and this will help quite a bit for more advanced observation. Anyway, so let's get right into it. So to begin with, I'm going to direct you to the checklist of Santa Clara County, which is available on the Santa Clara Valley Audubon. As the checklist indicated, Forster's tern is by far the most common tern in Santa Clara County. And being the most common, it's the one that we really have to make sure we nail down, the one that we really get a handle on. So Forster's tern can easily be seen Charleston Slough, Shoreline Lake, anywhere in Alviso, on the bay, of course, over the water, where the adults forage for food for the young, which they are raising. So Forster's tern is a medium-sized tern, and it has what I would call silvery wings. The hand portion of the wing, which would be the primaries and the inner primaries, are quite whitish in flight. And you can see that on this bird right here, the one that's carrying the fish. So that's a little bit different from some of the other terns we'll talk about, especially common tern. But look at the crown, the black cap that it's wearing. During the breeding season, this is very obvious. During the non-breeding season, of course, they develop this sort of bandit mask, dark areas on either side of the eye that tends not to meet around the nape. So it gives it a unique appearance among our terns. The confusing thing is that the young birds, the juveniles, show a little bit of that mask as well. So, but you'll notice the more brownish and tan tones, the shorter bill, the shorter wings, the stumpier proportions of this young bird. But Forster terns are beautiful to watch. They're exciting to see as they chase each other during courtship flights, when they squabble, when they get back to the nest and try to find a place among the crowded quarters of a colony. So this is the default tern for our area, very beautiful and quite common. This very lovely common tern differs in several ways. You'll probably notice right away that it has more black on the head. It does not show the bandit mask of the non-breeding adult Forster's terns or the newly hatched juvenile Forster's terns. It has black or ash that goes around the back of the head and covers more of the crown. So this is quite different from any of the Forster's terns. However, Forster's terns, when they begin to molt out of their breeding plumage, can show patches of white on the forehead and even sometimes appear a little bit like a common tern, like this. So it's very important to look at other things, like the darkness of the primaries, which you can see right here are very dark. One probably crucial field mark to notice is what we call the dark carpal bar. So if you look at it in this book right here, you can see it pretty clearly right there. That dark area on the shoulder of the common tern is a really good mark. And in flight, it's you can see it right here and here. In flight, it shows up really, really clearly. The only problem with that field mark, as good as it is that the scapulars of the back of a tern sometimes cast a shadow on the coverts. So you may see Forster's terns that for a moment look like they have this dark carpal bar. That's very important to remember, and it's also very important to compel you to watch the bird for longer. See how the light changes. Make sure that that's not just a trick of the light, a shadow being cast on the wing itself by the scapulars. Because that does happen. It's happened to me. It's probably happened to you as well. Common tern is quite rare here. Currently, there's one in the Alviso area. I've not gone to see it yet, but I'd like to maybe later today. So you'll find them among other terns, of course. But don't let the name fool you. Common tern is not common here. So the next tern, the Caspian tern, is a colossal beast. It's often mistaken for a gull because it is so large. Its wing beats are slow. It has a loud, distinctive call. It looks a lot like a gull. but I've always noticed a slightly different manner of its flight. It seems to be smoother. The wings, of course, are very pointed, and it seems a little bit more elegant than your typical gull, but even that's debatable. But it reminded me that Caspian tern and all the terns that we're talking about today belong to the family of Laridae. Laridae includes gulls, terns, Jaegers, skimmers. Collectively, they reside within the larger order of Charadriformes. Charadriformes includes everything from sandpipers to plovers to auks and coursers from the old world, thick knees and stuff, what we typically call shorebirds. So, in a manner of speaking, terns are shorebirds, but not the way we normally think of shorebirds. We think of shorebirds as sandpipers, curlews, plovers, etc. But there is a close affinity between the gulls and the terns. The terns have evolved a really fish-oriented diet, whereas many gulls are much more scavengers. There are some exceptions, of course. Kittiwake is not really a scavenger, but in any case. So that's just the background on the family Laridae, which includes the terns. Now, the Caspian tern is the largest, the loudest, the biggest, and probably it's quite common here, but it only recently started to breed in Santa Clara County. There are islands in Alviso off of the marina where you can find them breeding. You can find them elsewhere in the large salt ponds breeding. As I said, they're very loud, and you could probably hear it right now. And the young, when the young take flight and they continue to want to be fed, they will follow the adults, and you'll hear sometimes the two sounds. The adult calling loudly, sort of like what I imagine a pterosaur might sound like, and then the whistling Caspian tern chick behind it trying to bake some food. So the Caspian tern, like I said, looks like a gull because it is that large. It has very, very pale upper wings, but the under wings are dark. So the primaries are quite dark on the flying Caspian tern. That makes it for an interesting flight pattern when you see it. One of my favorite sounds of summertime on the bay and along the coast is the cry of the elegant tern. This is a medium to large sized tern, and it's hard to know what it would be most confused with, whether it be confused with Caspian or Forsters. Either way, it's sort of between the size of those two extremes. Elegant tern has got a long, slightly drooped orange bill, which should distinguish it right away, but sometimes that color isn't that obvious. And it has a little bit of a bushy crest on the nape during the breeding season. But the birds don't breed here, or not traditionally at least. They've bred in Mexico and on small islands off the coast of Baja. Recently, though, they've decided to move their colony northward, or at least expand and open up some new colonies in Southern California, and very recently, a very small population near the Dumbarton Bridge. So while they don't breed in Santa Clara County, we find them pretty regularly on the large ponds. Sunnyvale Water Pollution Control Pond is a great place to look for them. Any place in Alviso again. I've seen them in Palo Alto Baylands. So any place that touches the bay probably is a good place to keep your eyes and ears open for the elegant tern. Now the young birds look a little bit different, but they have similar size, similar shape, and a little bit darker wings. You might have noticed when I said that Caspian terns are pale on the upper side and dark on the underside, that the bird I showed a moment ago didn't show that. Well, it's because the adults in various stages of plumage, whether they're post-breeding or winter, etc., or whether it's a first winter bird, they may display features that sort of contradict what the field guides tell you. In any case, see here how the young bird has very dark primaries and shows the cap very similar to the adult. So we can watch for that on the bay, and again, listen for it. So the next one, least tern, is the smallest, little ridiculously tiny tern you can imagine. It weighs 1.5 ounces. And if you think about Forster's tern, which weighs in at 6 ounces, imagine how that changes the way it flies. The least tern, well, Forster's tern has a really elegant, flowing, liquid flight. Wing beats can be fast, but generally they're relaxed. The bird is completely elegant. The least tern is a little fluttery thing. It's the impression it'll give you when you see it the first time is that can't be a tern. It's just too dinky. But they are terns, and they are very small. And their size and weight means that they fly very differently. Their wing beats are fast and fluttery, and the thing just scoots around the salt ponds in Alviso, Crittenden Marsh, along the Bay Trail, and you may find it elsewhere. It's quite common in Coyote Point, for example. Not common maybe, but it is seen there more often than it is down here. Remember, the least tern breeds in the East Bay, and then after breeding it comes down here, which means that we're going to see a lot of adults and immatures. So it's important to look for those. To be honest, recognizing the least tern isn't as difficult as the field guide, the field marks might convince you, because they are so small and the flight style is so different. They'll jump out immediately to you as being something not Forster's terns. And that's always the goal. How to distinguish these terns from the default tern in our area, Forster's tern. So look for it on Salt Pond A2E right now, which is on the Stevens Creek Trail as you head toward the bay. Head out there, and if you want, you can ride your bicycle or walk all the way to Sunnyvale Water Pollution Control Ponds. And on the course of that journey, you could see least, you could see Caspian, Forsters. The one common in our area right now is in Alviso, so I'll leave that one off the list, but you might see elegant. So that trail down by A2E and the Stevens Creek Trail, leading back past the Lockheed Ponds and all that, filled with terns right now. So give it a try and look for it. You can take this with a grain of salt if you'd like, but black tern is my favorite tern. It seems like I'm always saying that this bird or that bird is my favorite. So honestly, as an instructor, it's hard to pick your favorite subject. Black terns, however, are my favorite. And next to least, tern and elegance and Caspian, Forsters and common, whatever. Anyway, the problem with black tern is that when we see them here, they're not black. They're usually mottled and patterned. That's because they have started to lose their breeding plumage and go into their pre-basic molt. And what that means is they are surprisingly white sometimes, but you'll notice strange patches on them. If you remember the Bonaparte skull, the black ear patch that they develop, or Franklin's or laughing gull, how they develop some darkness around the head and crown and nape. Well, black tern is a little bit like that. It always shows a black bill, and the wings are usually sort of ashy gray, much more so than any of the other terns. However, you don't see huge areas of black. So this bird can be difficult to distinguish. You'd be surprised how easy it is to confuse with the Bonaparte skull. At least I find. Look for it in any of the ponds that lie in the Alviso area, particularly off of the A12, I believe, is a good place to look for them. A16, any of the ponds. So take your bicycle, be prepared for a long walk. Head out there with a scope and a smile, because it could take you a while to pick this bird out. But the interesting thing about black terns is they're very tiny, not quite as small as least. So they do have a very delicate fluttery flight. But you will never see a black tern dive. All the other terns will dive into the water. Even Caspian will dive into the water sometimes. But this is a marsh breeding, prairie pothole breeding, Sierra meadow breeding tern. And the ponds where it lives are quite shallow. and it doesn't tend to dive, but it'll pick things off of the surface. And one thing that kind of makes me a little bit sad is that one of its favorite thing is dragonflies. So if you see them on the breeding grounds, you may very well see black terns feasting on dragonflies. So there's that. But anyway, look for black tern this time of year, and particularly in August, I think, is when the checklist says they're most likely to be seen. I sure hope someone finds it soon, because it's been a year since I've seen one, and I would love to see black tern again. So the last tern I want to talk about isn't really a tern at all. It's the black skimmer. But remember, it is in the family of Laridae, along with skuas, gulls, and terns. But it's remarkable enough and unique enough that I wanted to share it as part of this video. Black skimmers have an interesting story, which Bill Bausman writes at length about in the Breeding Bird Atlas, which is available from the Audubon Society. They only arrived in our area in the mid-90s. So when I first arrived in California in 1981, there were no black skimmers here. There were some in Southern California. And when I did finally see them in the mid-90s, I was confused. The field guide didn't show them here, but they had gradually made a movement northward. And now I think they can be found in Oregon and possibly even north of that. So specifically with the Santa Clara County and the Bay Area, one of the ideas that Bill talks about is the possibility that the construction of the salt ponds initially brought the terns into the area, and the work that's been done to restore the habitats has probably also been helpful to the skimmers. But now we have got them breeding in Santa Clara County, not only here year-round, but breeding. So this is quite remarkable and a new thing, especially if you have an older field guide. They won't indicate that they're here at all. The best place to see the black skimmers probably is Shoreline Lake. So go there or Charleston Slough any time of day and watch the ponds, watch the lake, watch the little island. Very likely you'll see some black skimmers. And last I was there, I think there were 47 or something like that. So a good number. There'll be a mixture of adults and juveniles. It's really a wonderful story. I love this hulking build, elegant black and white ballerina. It is just beautiful. The way it flies, with its languid wing beats, which are held above the horizontal when it's skimming so that they don't run the risk of dipping the wings into the water. There's a curious thing about the iris of the bird, which is vertical, rather like a cat, which helps to cut down on the glare as it looks down, face down into the water, which can be very glary indeed. So interesting bird. And obviously the lower mandible being longer than the upper mandible means that when it dips its bill and skims along the surface with its wings held up above the horizontal, it'll detect the fish and quickly snap it up in its bill. So you might wonder, well, what happens if it hits a small twig or a root underneath the surface? That's a risk that happens, and it apparently it does occasionally create cause and injury to the bird. But the neck is quite long, and the neck muscles are very strong, so it tends to recover from that. In any case, look for the adults and the immatures, and notice whether the black of the adult is continuous from the crown to the back, or whether there's a small gap. Because in winter, in basic plumage, you begin to see a gap develop, a collar of white or gray on the nape, on the lower neck. And that is the beginning of the winter plumage. So the basic plumage has a collar, the alternate plumage, the breeding plumage, does not. Anyway, look for the look for the skimmers the same time you're looking for terns, because they're here right now and they're lovely. So that'll do it today for the talk about terns. Don't forget, when you head outside, use your checklist, use your field guide, report your sightings on eBird, and most importantly, wear a mask. I'd like to point out that when you do wear a mask, you might actually see some things you weren't counting on seeing. For example, my lenses are steaming up a little bit, but that's okay. Look what I've seen recently: snowy owl, scarlet tanager, wood stork. So please wear a mask when you head outside, and be courteous to others on the trail. And we'll see you next time.
BirdGuy.